Good.
Hey.
All right, we good?
Keep going.
The clock, it's ticking.
Off we go.
60 minutes. 60 minutes.
60 minutes.
It's time for 60 Minutes, Sundays on CBS.
Tonight, Eye on America. As severe heat batters the U.S., the technology that's allowing renewable energy to keep the power on for millions. Then, what's slowing down Hurricane Beryl recovery in Texas and tornado and flooding risks for the Northeast on the CBS.
Can and will defend every inch of NATO territory, and we'll do it together.
I think the president is great, and there were some misrepresentations of what I had said. I never said he should reconsider his decision.
Your reaction to Senator Rubio at the rally yesterday, do you look vice presidential to you?
I felt this, I like Marco. I think he'd be an excellent choice.
Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. Today was, by any measure, a very busy day for President Biden. There was some campaign stuff, meeting with union leaders to sort of re-engage them and reassure them about the status of his campaign. There was presiding over the NATO summit right here in Washington. Oh, yes, and more calls from Capitol Hill Democrats that the sitting president of the United States should bow out of renomination at the Democratic National Convention. All of this a prelude to a must-see TV press conference hosted by the president tomorrow here in Washington. Biden, of course, as you are well aware, has been spending the last few days trying to reassure nervous members of his party and, by extension, the world and NATO counterparts that he is not only fit now, but fit for a full 4 more years to serve as commander-in-chief. All this while his challenger, presumptive Republican nominee and former president Donald Trump, let's just say he's latched on to this Democratic disarray.
The new pledge sends an unmistakable message to the world that every NATO member is committed to doing their part to keep the alliance strong. We can and will defend every inch of NATO territory.
The radical left Democrat Party is divided in chaos and having a full-scale breakdown, all because they can't decide which of their candidates is more unfit to be president, sleepy, crooked Joe Biden or laughing Kamala.
Ed O'Keefe and Scott McFarland are following today's many events and join us now. I want to go to Ed O'Keefe at the White House first. Ed, what is the latest reporting you have about the mindset at the White House, renomination, and this ferment that continues to persist among Capitol Hill Democrats?
The White House quite pleased, Major, with how the NATO summit is going. They believe he had a pretty good speech last night and today. Between that meeting with union leaders this morning and with European diplomats all day long and into tonight, they believe it gives that contrast that they're trying to demonstrate against Donald Trump, putting the president there on the world stage. When you're down and out with your own party, who better to spend some time with today than 2 key constituencies that love him dearly, union bosses and European leaders, and he's getting to do that. When it comes to the ongoing strife in the party, the president's aware of it. The campaign is aware of it. They announced today, and this is going to be a critical meeting, if not one that makes much sense, significant. It doesn't seem to appear to have much significance right now. Tomorrow, when he sends 3 of his most trusted advisors, his campaign chief, Jen O'Malley Dillon, his top speechwriter, Mike Donnellan, and his key liaison to the Congress, Steve Ricchetti, to meet with Democratic senators. And the plan appears to be to lay out for them the maps, the numbers, the data as they know it, as they see it, and as they plan to execute it in the months ahead. All of it designed to assuage their concerns amid growing fears that not only are the president's numbers down in battleground states, but in the next set of states behind that, and that it's also dragging down House and Senate candidates.
And, Ed, I wonder if there is something that you've detected at the White House that borders on frustration, that this is still an open question. In letters and in statements, to my ears and to my reading, the president's been pretty clear on this. Yet even those with stature that is almost unmatched, at least in House Democratic circles, Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi, don't seem to have gotten the message. Still say, well, it's still up for the president to decide. Do they feel frustrated that Democrats haven't gotten the message he's decided?
There's some of that, and there's also a sense of like, look, we're not going anywhere, at least not right now. So, deal with it, or just, let this blow over. And I think one thing that I've heard from people here in Wilmington, up at the Capitol, across the country who do this work is they look at the calendar for the president, and they look at the Republican calendar, and they look at the American calendar, and they believe that in the next few weeks, this is inevitably going to fall off the front pages, or at least get pushed down a bit. You got the Republican convention coming. Trump's got to pick his running mate. Much of the focus of the world will be on what goes on in Milwaukee. And you got the Olympics. A lot of Americans are going to get, obsessed with gymnasts, not with poll numbers in battleground states. And then, yes, there's going to be a Democratic convention. And for now, the president's planning to be the nominee. And there's 4 months left to go. And if there's one thing Team Biden has always been good at least in the last 5 years, it's in keeping its eye on Election Day. A poll today does not reflect what a poll will look like on Election Day. And that has been their North Star. It was in 2020. It is right now. But one campaign official earlier today conceded this has been the toughest week of the campaign so far.
Definitely the toughest week of the campaign, and just to put a word in there for track and field athletes as well as gymnasts, Ed.
Don't forget fencing.
And judo. Does the Biden campaign feel that this week, tough as it has clearly been, has been unnecessarily injurious to the president? Because if Democrats had been silent this week and not come out publicly, they would be better off. And that they are not just frustrated, but kind of aggravated that this persists within their own family.
But that's not how Democrats operate. You and I know, you especially having covered things for quite a while, that that's not how this party operates. They're always in pursuit of perfection, and anything short of it leads to hand-wringing and hallway conversations with reporters and cable news appearances and whatnot. And while Republicans have pretty much towed the line, or have learned to in the last 8+ years, Democrats, or at least this week and last week, are not. And look, it's rooted in the fact that more than 2 years of polling has shown that the biggest barrier of entry for someone to support the president right now is his age. That if he were a 51-year-old president, the nature of this race might be much different. And it's driven a lot by a voter's personal experience. They've seen a relative, a neighbor, or a friend age, and they are concerned that the United States may for the first time watch a president age so significantly in office that it might force him out. And so that's a tough one that Wilmington and the White House have had to deal with, but that has been exacerbated by his disastrous performance nearly 2 weeks ago tonight.
A tough one, persisting, as you just said, Ed O'Keefe, for now going on 2 full weeks. Thank you so very much from the White House, Ed O'Keefe. I want to turn now to Scott MacFarlane. Scott MacFarlane, the Capitol is, for Democrats, the locus of this anxiety. What's the latest?
If you pay close attention, Major, you can feel the marble wobbling. The president's political standing here in the Capitol is feeling tremors. It's feeling quakes. It's not clear if that's going to mean anything to the president or if Congress can nudge him one way or the other. But it was a 9th U.S. House Democrat who, this afternoon, formally said and publicly said he thinks the president should just withdraw. He's Pat Ryan, second-term Democrat from a purple district in upstate New York, joining a bunch of other frontline Democrats, those facing particularly difficult re-election races, who've done so over the past few days. And they've done so symmetrically, Major. They've issued written statements in their hometown papers, and they've declined to talk about it on TV, instilling a little bit of message discipline that some others in the party have not shown over the past 72 hours. Pat Ryan joins Angie Craig, frontliner from Minnesota, and just yesterday, Mikey Sherrill, Democrat from New Jersey, from releasing this type of statement in just that pattern. Let's put that aside. There are obviously wedges inside the party caucuses in both the House and the Senate. They're becoming clear as day. The president still has very vocal supporters among the Black caucus and among his top surrogates in the House. Still has some particularly emphatic supporters in the Senate. Think Chris Coons of Delaware, John Fetterman of Pennsylvania. But there's wedges there, too, including the, cynicism he's getting from some Senate Democrats, especially those in frontline races. Take a listen to a pair. Sherrod Brown of Ohio, followed by Senator Fetterman.
I'm hearing legitimate concerns from Ohio voters. My job is to listen to them.
Well, I mean, he's entitled to his views, but he's in a really tough race. So I understand sometimes you have to have a little professional wrestling.
So yes, Major, we're in unprecedented times on an unprecedented story. It's just not clear how sustainable it is for the party to try to operate with two things: that type of a divide and this much of a focus on things not involving Congress. Members of Congress are walking around here, Major, answering questions about President Biden and seemingly President Biden alone.
Scott, I want to play for you comments from Colorado Democratic Senator Michael Bennet on CNN about this race and where he thinks it's headed. Let's take a quick listen.
Donald Trump is on track, I think, to win this election and maybe win it by a landslide and take with him the Senate and the House.
Does Senator Bennet speak for Senate Democrats you've bumped into, Scott?
He didn't say he was an ambassador for others, nor have others said they want to align themselves with Senator Bennett's comments. But what's been clear from our reporting over the past 48 hours here at the U.S. Senate is that the largest part of the Senate Democratic caucus is the part that is, quote, undeclared, or not making a declarative statement either way. So the Senate, more so than the House, seems to have preserved this ability to get in line, at least a large number of them in line, and try to speak with one voice, try to nudge this debate one way or the other. At this moment, even the Senate Democratic leadership includes people who have not specifically said, turn the page, it's President Biden, let's go to November. There really is a lot of variable in the Senate Democratic caucus.
Let's go back to the House. If there is a lodestar voice or figure within House Democratic circles, it is Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi. I want to play two parts of interactions that Speaker Emerita Pelosi had today on this topic. Let's run them.
It's up to the president to decide if he is going to run. We're all encouraging him to make that decision because time is running short.
I think the president is great, and there are some misrepresentations of what I have said. I never said he should reconsider his decision. The decision is the president's.
Scott, how is that being sifted? The Pelosi comments, one then the other.
I think it was the most resonant thing heard on Capitol Hill today, just using that phrase as she did this morning. It's up to the president to choose if he's going to run or to decide if he's going to run. The president was unequivocal in his letter to Congress Monday. He's running. Let's move on. So her raising that question rhetorically has meaning. It may have impact. We'll see if other members feel liberated to share their opinions based on that.
Scott MacFarlane on Capitol Hill, as always, thank you. New ratings from the Cook Political Report give former President Trump a bigger lead over President Biden in several key battleground states. What states have now moved into the Republican column? Coming up, you're streaming America Decides.
Coming up, our series. Wait a minute. Tom, is that you working the camera?
Keep leaning out of your close-up.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
I had progressively fallen deeper into the world of online sports betting.
The risk is the rush.
What do you think is driving the spike in popularity?
I think it's legality.
If it's legal, I'm going to use it. There are ways to bet when you are 18.
We've created an epidemic of child gambling.
You can't walk into a male dormitory in a college campus without sports betting happening.
It's America's most neglected problem.
I used sports betting as a way to escape, when in reality, I'm choosing self-destruction. Whatever I had left, it was gone.
The purpose of the industry is to get you to play to extinction. And that means until all your money is gone.
Go to the ends of the earth. Reach for the stars.
Yeah, I just took off. That kind of thing.
Oh, that's pretty good. Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
That desired farm, it's a wonderful place to raise children, and it still is.
Promises broken.
Black Americans have been the target of racism and discrimination pretty much from the time they acquired ownership in the land.
Costing black farmers hundreds of billions in generational wealth.
They did everything to make sure we were run off that land.
But communities are uniting to continue the fight.
Collective ownership is powerful.
To keep their land and their dreams alive.
To watch my children play on land that we own means everything.
So land is power.
Most definitely.
40 Acres and a Mule, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
People with developmental disabilities were once sequestered by the hundreds of thousands in institutions.
Many of our fellow citizens are suffering tremendously because lack of attention, lack of imagination, lack of adequate manpower.
Disability activists have since torn down barriers blocking them from living at home or in the community.
We conclude that Title II of the ADA requires states to provide community-based treatment for persons with mental disabilities.
But of the 16,000 people who remain in state-operated institutions, half are in 5 states, and Illinois is one of them.
I don't want to live in the institution. It makes me feel discriminated against.
Do you think there are people living in institutions in Illinois that don't need to be living there?
Yeah, because they're proving it as soon as they get out.
Welcome back to America Decides. We could fairly describe this as bad news for the Biden campaign, and they've had their fair share this week. The Cook Political Report, it's a nonpartisan election forecaster, is now shifting 6 battleground states in the direction of former President Trump. They are Arizona and Georgia. Nevada, they go from toss-up to lean Republican. Minnesota, Nebraska's 2nd congressional district, and New Hampshire shift from likely Democrat to lean Democrat. I want to bring in Cook Political Report Senate and Governor's editor Jessica Taylor to break it all down for us. Jessica, how did you arrive at these shifts? How consequential do they appear to be?
We've seen this shift toward Trump in these states that Biden won last cycle for some time now. But when we also look at where Biden has dropped in national polling since the debate, even a 2-point shift in the national landscape will translate to even a minor shift in these states. And so, it's consistent with where we are seeing Trump doing better and Biden struggling with particularly Latino voters and particularly Latino men in Arizona and Nevada, and with black men in a state like Georgia. And so we really could not say that these are really true toss-ups at this point, that this is a place where, when we were talking with our sources and when our editor-in-chief Amy Walter in her analysis said that just even a small shift in the drop that we've seen in the debate and where undecideds are, that this necessitated really a shift. And so what this tells us is that it seemed like this for some time, but really the only plausible path to 270 for Joe Biden at this point looks like keeping that blue wall intact with Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin.
And based on the sourcing, based on the data, is this shift reflective entirely of the debate, or was some of this moving before the debate?
I think there was a little bit more of a stasis before the debate. And so if there's anything that the Biden campaign could take some solace in, is that some of these voters are not, as we call them, the double haters that that dislike both candidates. They're not necessarily moving toward Trump, but they're moving away from Biden. So the question is, do they win them back? Do those people skip the presidential vote? Do they only vote down ballot? There's also a concern for the Senate and House. What do they do? Do these voters just simply stay home? Do they vote third party? We also unveiled our CPR polling average this week and also saw, the biggest shift that we've seen in the race, even though it's a very small one, that shows Trump now at 47 in our average of really polls that we trust to 44% for Biden. And that is the biggest shift we have seen in the race. So I think this debate was really a seminal moment, and clearly what comes after it. And especially with the RNC next week, we typically see that nominees would get a bump in that.
Right. 3 to 4 points is the historical average. 3 to 4 points would be really important with this backdrop of a shift in these states. And you mentioned something that I want to spend just a second to talk about, because I think voters and viewers sometimes get different information about this. They will hear, well, don't pay attention to national numbers because we elect presidents based on state-by-state outcomes. But to your point from just a moment ago, shifts in national numbers also can be found to be reflective in battleground states.
Yes. And where we have seen, because of the Electoral College advantage that Republicans have built in some of these states, you have to have Democrats win by a significant point. I mean, where we saw Biden winning the popular vote, and even Clinton winning the popular vote wasn't enough in 2016. Biden won it by a larger margin, by about 4 points. But if we're looking at Trump winning, the popular vote is now very much on the table, which I think that we would not have thought even, a few months ago, perhaps.
And a win for former President Trump in the popular vote could quite conceivably translate to a
could be an
very
electoral
large
route. Yes.
Electoral route or landslide.
We could be talking about easily 300 plus electoral votes.
Maybe 350 or something.
Maybe. When you have states like Minnesota and New Hampshire that are on there, there's increasing worry. We didn't shift it this time, but we recently shifted, Virginia into a more competitive category that was a 10-point state. I'm hearing even concern in a place like New Mexico. So it's these states, if we're talking about those states, then we're not talking, about there's just such a
There's no
narrowing
blue
path.
wall ever that can prevent that.
Right.
Exactly. Jessica Taylor, thank you so very much for your expertise and your
Thank
time.
you.
Former President Trump kind of teased a potential running mate during his Florida rally last night. What he had to say as speculation, well, let's just say increases about who he will ask to join the Republican ticket. That's next. You're streaming America Decides.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team. Nate has one of the quickest minds I've ever seen.
Tony has a way of making people feel comfortable.
Gail has this unbelievable knack to ask the question that you're asking at home.
I've been told I could talk to a tree, and that's pretty much true.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
It didn't seem like anything could happen, because nothing ever happens in East Palestine, but it did.
Authorities released toxic fumes from 5 derailed train cars.
Resident, please evacuate.
Acute bronchitis due to chemical fumes.
Did you ever have these problems before the derailment?
No, ma'am.
This neighborhood's not safe no more.
We can assure the community that there's not vinyl chloride entering their communities.
Then why are there so many people feeling these various symptoms of bloody noses or difficulty breathing, bronchitis?
That's a hard question to answer.
We're talking about one of the most blatant releases of a mixture of some of the most toxic chemicals that we've seen in America.
I feel like now I have a duty to warn other communities. If my daughter has to watch me die of cancer, at least it saves someone else. This case.
It's like a screenplay, something straight out of Hollywood.
But it's not fiction. It's 48 hours.
Human remains found this week.
4 families shattered.
There's no physical evidence.
The mystery would haunt investigators for years.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Like a John Grisham novel.
A gripping true crime original. 48 hours. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform.
You can be really old at 60, and you can be really young at 85.
Inspire.
How do we unlock the power within ourselves to be who we want to be?
And brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good. Always send the people home happy.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Dragon capsule here in space.
sightseers in space, the thrill of a lifetime.
Seeing the Earth from space, it was so exhilarating.
But the risks that come with the territory.
There have been 4 fatal accidents. That's a 1% fatal accident rate.
Might make you look before you launch.
If you had 1 out of 100 airplanes falling out of the sky, we'd have a public crisis.
Space tourism, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Get all of them back there. Oh, that's a lot, Marco. That's a lot, Marco. I think they probably think I'm going to be announcing that Marco is going to be vice president. Because that's a lot of press. That's a lot of press.
It was former President Trump kind of teasing about whether or not Senator Marco Rubio of Florida will be his running mate. That was during his rally last night in Doral, Florida. His possible VP pick, well, he also took the stage last night and, not surprisingly, delivered remarks praising Trump, blasting President Biden. Rubio is one of several Republicans confirmed to be on the former president's vice presidential shortlist. CBS News Miami reporter Jim DeFede joins us now. Jim, what do you think Marco Rubio's status is presently in the Veep Stakes competition?
The reporting I have tells me that he is still on the short list, but that there is really no way of knowing where Donald Trump is ultimately going to land. I think there were a lot of people that were hoping the former president would announce at the rally yesterday in Doral. There was a lot of anticipation that that might happen. In speaking to other Republicans here, they were kind of hoping for it. But then a few also told me at the same time that they realized that the president's campaign didn't really want to get in the way of all of Joe Biden's bad press by making a VP announcement on yesterday. So as a result, they just sort of let it dangle. Now, we know that the announcement has to come in the next few days, but we'll see. Now, the counter view to Marco being the pick is, and this is what I keep hearing more and more, is Marco too much of his own person in some ways to fit Donald Trump, what Donald Trump wants as a vice president? Does Marco Rubio's ambition lead him to be someone who Donald Trump couldn't necessarily trust as his number 2? That's one of the things that you hear. But of course, you hear it sometimes from folks from other camps who want to spell that out and sort of put that out there. But that's certainly something of interest.
Jim, you are as read in as any reporter in Florida on the history of Florida political figures, those who have worked around them and with them and watched them rise. There's an interesting Venn diagram that overlays between the Trump campaign and Marco Rubio, specifically with Susie Wiles and Tony Fabrizio, correct?
Absolutely. You know, you've got particularly Susie Wiles is a big Marco Rubio fan, big Marco Rubio supporter, was involved with Marco from her early days here in Florida. And that is certainly, if Marco Rubio ends up getting picked, Susie Wiles is likely one of the strong reasons for. Now, of course, you know, I know that there is the question of, can you have Donald Trump and Marco Rubio both from the state of Florida? And is, I think, our general understanding of the way the Constitution works on that is it wouldn't prevent him from picking Marco Rubio. But if Marco Rubio maintains his residency here in Florida, he would have to, well, Donald Trump would lose access to the 30 electoral votes. Florida's electors wouldn't be able to vote for both men. But that's an easy fix. And one of the easy fixes, and Donald Trump seemed to suggest that it wasn't really going to be a problem, is Marco Rubio's history. You just had a segment where you talked about states that are now leading Republican. One of those is Nevada. Marco Rubio has a long history in Nevada. Marco Rubio, when he was about 8 years old, his entire family, because they were out of work here in Miami after immigrating from Cuba, moved to Las Vegas. His mom worked as a maid for a hotel maid on the Strip. His father was a bartender at one of the casinos. You know, Marco Rubio was actually baptized a Mormon, little known fact, during his time in Nevada. Now, of course, when they came back to South Florida, he went back to the Roman Catholic Church. But for a time, Marco Rubio was a Mormon. You know, he was there from about roughly the age of 8 to 14. And so he has a lot of cousins. He has other family there. And that Hispanic vote in Nevada, if you basically take Marco Rubio and plop him in Las Vegas, and basically he camps out there and works Arizona, New Mexico, and Nevada, that could make strong political sense. That's what Marco Rubio, I think, has going for him more than anything else right now.
And Jim, also word today that Florida's governor, Ron DeSantis, has been, quote unquote, added to the Republican National Committee speaking schedule next week.
Yeah, I'm sure it was just an oversight that his name wasn't on the original list. But that's another interesting dynamic with the Rubio part of it. Because if you think about it, if Marco Rubio has to leave the state of Florida and, let's say, go to Nevada or go somewhere else, then it's an open Senate seat. And who does Donald Trump hand the ability to give a Senate seat to? He hands it to Ron DeSantis. Does he want to give Ron DeSantis the power to pick the next senator from Florida as well? There is so much triangulation here. It's fascinating, but obviously in a few days, by Monday, we'll know for sure who he's picking for VP. But no, we're all going to be paying attention to Ron DeSantis' speech at the convention. I'm sure it'll be lively, and Donald Trump will probably watch and go, yeah, I beat that guy. Yeah, so, whether or not he wants to crown him the future of the party, I'm not sure Donald Trump is ready to give that title over to Ron DeSantis just yet.
As you mentioned, Jim DeFede, lots of triangulation. Meanwhile, Donald Trump Jr. keeps telling his dad, very simple with J.D. Vance, Dad, real simple. Jim DeFede in Florida, thanks so very much. Our America Decides team will have special coverage of the Republican National Convention next Monday through Thursday, starting at 5 p.m. Eastern. Stay with us all night and all week long. As NATO meetings continue right here in Washington, world leaders are, well, quite obviously paying close attention to the presidential race and the political prospects of President Biden. Also, who's more aligned with that alliance? Our political panel will weigh in on that and the day's top political news. That's right here next on America Decides.
Washington is the seat of power. National security, foreign policy, global economics, every story comes through Washington in some way. We bring some of the most powerful voices in America to the table. We don't just ask the questions, you have to go deeper. We try to understand what's at the heart of the issue we're talking about, to then come forward with solutions.
Face the Nation on CBS.
The justices ruled that Harvard and the University of North Carolina violated the Constitution.
In the aftermath of the Supreme Court decision to end affirmative action in college admissions, uncertainty sets in for some students of color.
Affirmative action really gave us an equal opportunity.
CBS Reports explores the historic decision and what it means for those chasing an opportunity to change their lives.
I knew that college was the ticket to break this cycle.
The end of affirmative action, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
America Decides is your place for fact-based, unbiased reporting.
At the White House, at the Capitol, on the campaign trail. What do you say to those in your party?
Any cracks in the Republican Party?
Our reporters and our anchors travel the country talking to voters like you
about the issues that matter most.
Immigration is really a factor right now
that are going to be driving your decisions.
What would you say to those who say, look, that's just democracy at work?
Listening to you and bringing your voice into our coverage.
I want a strong, proud America.
Is democracy on the ballot in 2024?
Let us help you decide.
America Decides on CBS News 24/7.
Stream our expanded one-hour program Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
AI is among the most world-changing technologies ever.
Curing diseases, scientific breakthroughs, making lives better.
They can help us with medical discoveries, scientific discoveries, doing better agriculture, having cures for things like Alzheimer's.
It's also going to really transform the way we work.
The uplifting potential of artificial intelligence is limitless.
It gives you a friend, somebody to chat with 24/7 that is non-judgmental. He makes me feel loved and desired.
And so are its downfalls.
The problem with all this AI is that it's unpredictable and uncontrollable.
The choices we make now will have lasting effects for decades, maybe even centuries.
The ChatGPT revolution, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
We are about to see American weapons in the hands of Mexican cartels.
A gun pipeline to Mexico.
We are arming the cartels.
100%, no doubt about it.
Happening right under our noses.
Who's doing something about this? Nobody.
A CBS Reports exclusive.
Most Americans have no idea that we are effectively arming the enemy next door.
This is the story the American people need to know.
Arming cartels. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
The United States was attacked on September 11th. Our NATO allies, all of you, stood with us. A breathtaking display of friendship that the American people will never, ever, ever forget.
I just want them to pay their bills. We're protecting Europe. They take advantage of us very badly.
President Biden and former President Trump, well, they really could not disagree more about NATO's importance to the United States and how to keep the alliance going. This is leaders from that alliance are here in Washington to celebrate 75 years of cooperation. I want to bring in our political panel, Sabrina Siddiqui and Sam Vinograd. Sabrina is national politics reporter for the Wall Street Journal. Sam is, of course, a CBS News national security contributor. Sam, I want to talk to you first. Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State, said today that there is a clear path for Ukraine to join NATO. Also, an announcement from the United States, Denmark, and the Netherlands to send F-16s to Ukraine. Break down the importance of both of those.
Sure. So there is both a short-term and longer-term agenda for Ukraine as part of this NATO summit. In the short term, it was critical that allies showed, and they delivered on this major, immediate support for Ukraine in their war against Russia. There were announcements of additional air defense batteries and components from the United States and 4 other allies, which will be delivered to Ukraine in the coming months, as well as these F-16s, which have been held up. So direct military support was announced en route to Ukraine. Over the longer term, there were also really important announcements about Ukraine's, quote, irreversible path to membership in NATO. That's being operationalized as well. The allies announced that there will be a NATO security training assistance mission set up that will help coordinate NATO support for really bringing Ukraine into the fold. So we see both the short-term deliverables and the longer-term deliverables. The problem is major. The elephant in the room is that there's a rush to do all of this because come November, if Mr. Trump does win the election, all bets are off. And Ukraine as a part of NATO, as an irreversible path to NATO, is no longer an absolute certainty. So time is not on Ukraine's side in this respect.
Pick up on that, Sabrina, this idea that new commitments, fresh commitments, and a kind of hurried pace with the prospect of possibly losing the presidency and all of this falling apart, or being slowed significantly down, if not reversed.
That's a big concern among NATO allies who are watching this election very closely. And I think especially as concerns have mounted over President Biden and his viability at the top of the ticket, there's, a real sense of panic among some NATO member countries that you could see a return to a Trump presidency, where we are well aware of former President Trump's skepticism toward NATO more broadly. And of course, his lack of support for Ukraine in its war with Russia. Now, former President Trump hasn't actually offered many details on how he would handle the war differently, but he has opposed sending additional funding to Ukraine, which has, of course, been a key priority of the Biden administration's. And, he said he'd bring the war to an end. But what does that mean? And, there's a lot of concern that he would try and broker some kind of peace deal that would be favorable toward Russian President Vladimir Putin. So I don't think it's by accident that President Biden was really focusing on reaffirming U.S. support for Ukraine in both the short and the long term, as well as making a point to note that NATO member countries are meeting their defense contributions, contrary to what former President Trump has often said, in a bid to really draw contrast with his opponent.
And Sam, isn't it true that when former President Trump says, I'll have this Ukraine-Russia war settled, most European leaders interpret that to mean you're cutting off U.S. aid and giving Ukraine no viable choice other than to capitulate and to surrender at some form or another?
I think the whole world assumes that when Mr. Trump says he'll end the war quickly, that's by placating Vladimir Putin. That has historically been his track record with Russia.
And he's done nothing to publicly disabuse people of making that assumption, which he could.
He hasn't. And ironically, NATO member Hungary, Viktor Orban, and Mr. Trump do have that in common, a very cozy relationship with Vladimir Putin. But what I do think the Biden administration has failed to do and is quite focused on doing is trying to explain NATO's relevance to everyday Americans. Mr. Trump has capitalized on this notion that NATO is for them. It doesn't directly impact the United States. Why are we paying their bills? when in fact NATO, and when I was in government, I worked closely with NATO partners on key issues in the counterterrorism space and otherwise. NATO directly impacts U.S. homeland and national security.
Sabrina, I want to talk about this week in terms of not only juggling the NATO summit and the many serious issues there, but this tortured political conversation that persists about the president's viability. And it's not a Republican conversation at all. Republicans aren't even touching it, wisely watching the fracas play out entirely within the Democratic Party. How has that affected the president, and how does it inform the future of Kamala Harris, the vice president?
Well, the fact that we're still talking about this, Major, when tomorrow marks 2 weeks since the debate, is exactly why this has been extremely challenging for President Biden and his reelection campaign. They had hoped to put this issue to rest. You know, I think there are Democrats who felt like the president should have been out, you know, in public more and more forceful in the initial days after the debate in defending his candidacy, his performance. They felt like he was late to reach out to leaders and other Democrats on Capitol Hill who are still openly weighing whether or not he should stay at the top of the ticket, even though President Biden has been very clear that he has no plans to go anywhere. How does it inform Vice President Kamala Harris? Look, she's been one of his most loyal defenders in both public and private since the debate. And I think that, you know, what she has really, you know, said to people behind the scenes, in addition to what she said in public, is that she believes that Biden is best positioned to defeat Trump and that they should try and refocus on the threat that Trump poses to democracy rather than prolonging this conversation that only weakens the Democratic Party because it gives ammunition to Republicans to portray Biden as a weak candidate. But, you know, there are a lot of Democrats who are kind of rallying behind her as the most viable alternative. They think she's a known entity. She could easily inherit his campaign cash, which another candidate wouldn't be able to do because she's already on the ticket. And they just feel like that would be the most seamless path if he were to step aside. But that's the big caveat. And there's just no evidence at this point in time that the president will step aside.
Thinking about this a year ago, Sabrina, isn't it fair to say that the vice president could fairly look at those Democrats now rallying to her and say, where were you a year ago when almost none of you said I was up for the job or capable of carrying out the obligations of vice president, and would never say a public word in my defense when I was being pounded by Republicans relentlessly?
I think there has been a lot of frustration I've heard from, you know, supporters of Vice President Harris who feel like she has, you know, withstood attacks that have been, you know, rooted in racism, misogyny. She is, of course, the first woman, the first black person, and the first of Indian descent to hold the role of vice president. And there was just a lot of scrutiny on her performance in a way that her predecessors have not had to, you know, deal with. And she's really found her voice on reproductive rights. So there is a sense that she's also come into her own in the job. But, you know, it seems like it's too little too late right now. But there's still some Democrats who are calling for some kind of blitz primary. So, you know, right now, I think all bets are off. We really don't know where things are headed. And I think President Biden is just hoping that come next week, the party moves on and unites behind his candidacy. And this is no longer an open-ended discussion.
Never more have the words "stay tuned" been more true than they are now. Sabrina, Sam, thanks so very much.
If you can be convinced that you cannot defeat Donald Trump, will you stand down?
It depends if the Lord Almighty comes down and tells me that, I might do that.
Here's a question. Apart from that aforementioned divine intervention, is there any sign President Biden will part ways with his re-election campaign? We will ask that question next, right here on America Decides.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now.
We got something crazy. And reach for the stars.
There we are.
Time.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun. But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking.
Welcome to the idea of being a human being.
Innovative and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
At this moment, terrorists could be plotting another attack.
9/11 triggered a counter-terrorist system that included a secret database.
This person needs a closer look.
A growing list of nearly 2 million people, including some Americans who say they're innocent.
For 1 hour flight, I have to spend 6 hours to go and come back.
CBS Reports explores the system, the people responsible for it, and those pushing for change.
I'm not fighting against them. I'm fighting for them to do the right thing.
The Watch List, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Don't miss true crime anytime you want, anywhere you go. With the 48 Hours podcast. Real crimes, real lives, real justice.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Listen to 48 Hours on Apple Podcasts.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Imagine yourself in Manhattan with no police, no army, no mayor.
The people of Haiti stare down poverty, corruption, natural disasters, and violence.
90% of the guns that are used by gangs in Haiti are American guns.
But with an unbreakable spirit and eternal optimism.
There are days where I cry, but we can't be discouraged. We still believe in Haiti.
They're still able to look ahead with hope.
Haiti is on the brink of transformation, a radical shift. Nations are coming together and saying things must change.
Fighting for Haiti, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Hey there, welcome to The Uplift.
I thought she was a groom, and I stepped back and I went, oh, you're the queen. She's going to be with me every instant that I'm alive.
I just wanted to see if you'd go to Disneyland with me today.
I look over at him and he's smiling.
I'm going to remember that the rest of my life.
They told us when he was going to be born, he was only going to live for 30 minutes. It's really a miracle that he's with us today.
The Uplift. Stream now on the free CBS News app.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my 2 good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings.
A CBS News investigation. People looking for love, finding their life savings gone.
This could happen to anybody.
And sometimes losing their lives. Anything for love. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
As you heard before we went to break, President Biden has said only, quote, the Lord Almighty could compel him to drop out of the presidential race. Well, no word yet from God, but we are hearing from another man who is, now it says worship, that's a little strong, admired by millions. Oscar-winning actor and producer George Clooney wrote an op-ed that was published in today's New York Times saying that he loves Joe Biden, but that the Democrats need a new nominee. Susan Glasser is here to further discuss all of this. She's a staff writer for The New Yorker. Susan, always great to see you. Thank you so much for being with us. I want to start not with the politics. We'll get to that, I promise. But I want to get your assessment of the announcements made at the NATO summit, specifically F-16s, and this path for Ukraine to join NATO. Do you believe that will in any way change the calculus of Vladimir Putin and Russia, or inspire the Ukrainians to achieve more on the battlefield than they've been able to so far?
Well, first of all, as far as the F-16s go, that's important news. It is, in the eyes of many supporters of Ukraine in and out of the country, long overdue news, and an example perhaps where the U.S. and its allies were overly cautious earlier on in the war, worried about poking the Russian bear, and therefore not really delivering to Ukraine some of the kinds of capabilities that might have helped make a difference in the fight. But I think they're very welcome right now. As you know, Russia was on the offensive earlier this spring and summer. It appears that they have not made major breakthroughs against Ukraine. But, you know, again, just holding the line on a several hundred-mile front is extremely difficult. And I think those air capabilities in particular are something that the Ukraine military has identified for a long time. So I think that's a very big deal as far as on the ground. But the truth is, as President Zelensky expressed in his press conference yesterday here in Washington at the beginning of the NATO summit, Vladimir Putin, all eyes are on November and what happens in the American election. And I think that, you know, what happens at this NATO summit is important, but it's of secondary importance relative to the importance of the U.S. presidential election and whether it's Joe Biden or Donald Trump, because that's going to determine Ukraine's fate as much as anything.
You brought us right to the doorstep of politics, Susan. From your vantage point, and based on what you were reporting and writing, how probable do you believe it will be that President Biden will, come August in Chicago, be the Democratic nominee?
You know, look, if you believe anybody can tell you the answer to that question with certainty right now, they've also probably got a bridge in Brooklyn that they want to sell you. You know, as I'm sure you have had this experience too, Major, like I have talked with experienced, smart political professionals who believe with 100% certainty that Joe Biden is gone, that he is out of there, that by this time next week, he will not be the presumptive nominee for the Democrats. I have talked with equally experienced political professionals whom I respect, who say the exact opposite is the case. I think we're really in unscripted territory here. What is striking today, Wednesday evening, as we're having this conversation, is that the kind of rebellion against Biden from within the ranks of Democrats is not over yet. I think we can say that pretty clearly with the statement by former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi earlier today. So who knows?
And I'm really glad you described those conversations, Susan. They mirror the conversations I have. And what also strikes me is that they whipsaw, meaning people who are certain about one thing 48 hours ago are certain about the other thing in 48 hours later. And the ones that were certain about the other thing have moved, they've shifted around. That is to say, there is no fixed orientation to the future of a sitting president being the renominated nominee of a party.
The fixed orientation here, I think, is President Biden, who has dug in his heels, who has made it clear that he is going to keep fighting and that he is not entertaining this. Now, what veterans will tell you is, you know, he's dug in his heels until he hasn't, right? You know, that in fact, you've got to keep fighting until the very moment at which you are out of there. So it's not necessarily indicative of future events as much as it is of his present course. But everything we know about Joe Biden's personality and him as a politician suggests that his inclination is to tough it out, to power through, to complain that somehow he's just being counted out again. I find it very revealing, these statements emanating from Biden world in the last few days and over the last couple of weeks. Well, you know, when you're knocked down, you have to get back up. That's Joe Biden's mantra in life. The situation here, right, is that Joe Biden knocked himself down. And I will say that he's had losing presidential campaigns before, and he did know when to get out in all of those instances. But of course, he was never the sitting occupant of the Oval Office then.
Very quickly, Susan, George Clooney's op-ed, some people have described it to me as kind of an earthquake in the donor class of the Democratic Party. Do you view it that way?
Look, it's significant. Clooney was a host of a fundraiser just a few weeks ago. I thought it was very revealing that he chose to include in that op-ed the information that Biden was incredibly out of it, akin to how out of it he was at the debate at that fundraiser. You're going to hear and are already hearing a lot of questions. Well, how come nobody said anything? And I think that is a legitimate question. Former President Barack Obama, for example, was at that fundraiser. When are we going to hear from him? We're certainly hearing from some of his former advisors of Obama who are pretty strongly urging Biden to get out of the race. But it's not over. It's not over yet. Susan
Glasser, as always, thank you very much for your time and your expertise. Former President Trump takes aim at the Biden ticket as Democratic discord continues over who should lead the party. More on the Trump campaign, that's coming up next, right here on America Decides.
Okay, so let's just start at the beginning.
Well, let me start with this. What is at stake here?
What is the answer then?
Do you know why?
You want me to just keep going?
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Were there death threats?
How is this possible?
What's wrong with that argument?
Are you saying they lied?
Have you told the government that? Why won't you say the word crisis?
You're not answering my question.
Is that scary?
Does that make sense?
What do you mean? What does that mean?
Did any of that make sense?
What's your response?
What happened?
Why?
It's time for the CBS News Original 60 Minutes, Sunday on CBS and streaming on Paramount+.
There is no more room in our city.
New York City is receiving record numbers of migrants.
Today, we're going to have more than 500 adults and children come through that door.
Tensions rise as shelters reach max capacity.
We don't have to take care of them.
CBS Reports goes inside a crisis cities and families are facing as they fight to survive.
The United States still has that glimmer of hope for people to come here.
Fighting for a future. Now streaming on the free CBS News app. An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Since you started La Soup in 2014, do you have any sense as to how much food you've rescued from the landfill?
We've rescued 4.5 million pounds.
I can't even fathom how much food that is.
And that's one little person in one little city in America. We're going to call this chicken piccata. We did 450 of these meals today.
This is the exact dish that you and I are going to have.
Yep.
Oh, really good.
Is it good? Mm-hmm. Having a plan of how to keep people fed should be in every single city.
If we eliminated food waste, could we eliminate
hunger? Yes.
Eating Trash, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
America Decides is your place for fact-based, unbiased reporting.
At the White House, at the Capitol, on the campaign trail.
What do you say to those in your party?
Any cracks in the Republican Party?
Our reporters and our anchors travel the country talking to voters like you
about the issues that matter most.
Immigration is really a factor right now
that are going to be driving your decisions.
What would you say to those who say, look, that's just democracy at work?
Listening to you and bringing your voice into our coverage.
I want a strong, proud America.
Is democracy on the ballot in 2024?
Let us help you decide.
America Decides on CBS News 24/7.
Stream our expanded one-hour program Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern.
When people say who's first to get in the morning, that would be me. Morning news matters because it sets the tone for your day, and it's a way of getting you started.
Day to day, that first draft of history, it happens right here.
We're going to uplift you. We're going to send you out your way.
We'll take you places, we teach you new things, and we make you feel like, you know, it's not all bad.
People say to me, you always seem to be having a good time. And you know what? You're right.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
Welcome back to America Decides. Former President Trump challenged President Biden to another debate. He did so during a rally last night in Florida. And with some in the president's own party calling him to step aside, Trump also took particular aim at Vice President Kamala Harris.
Whatever else can be said about crooked Joe Biden, you have to give him credit for one brilliant decision, probably the smartest decision he's ever made. He picked Kamala Harris as his vice president. No, it was brilliant because it was an insurance policy.
Olivia Rinaldi joins us now from West Palm Beach, Florida. Olivia, you were there at the rally. You've been to many, many, many Trump rallies. Was it notable how much more former President Trump emphasized Kamala Harris than in the past?
Oh, absolutely, Major. This is the first time I've seen Donald Trump spend a significant amount of time talking about Vice President Kamala Harris. He spent, a good portion of the speech and even in prepared excerpts that they sent to us talking about her and linking her to some really potent policy issues that are overall really indicative of this election, including immigration. As we know, the Biden administration, President Biden himself, appointed Vice President Kamala Harris to be the person who would handle the border and immigration during their first term. And last night, Donald Trump said that she's failed at those policies. She hasn't shown up at the border. And he's made that a key point, again, to really tie her to these issues that are central to this election. And you heard in that quote right there where he's talking about her being an insurance policy. That's to make the argument that she's unelectable, that if President Biden were to step aside in some form and if he were to go against Kamala Harris, she is unelectable, and he feels that he has the better position on a lot of stances like immigration and the economy.
Olivia, how would you describe the mood at that rally?
That was an interesting night. I think there was a lot of anticipation with Senator Marco Rubio there as a potential vice presidential candidate. There were a lot of Latinos for Trump signs that I saw, and a lot of the speakers in the pre-program were speaking Spanish to them and to these voters, trying to, gather that support, galvanize them, and get them out. A lot of anticipation hanging over that very hazy, humid evening of us on the golf course. there in Doral, Florida. But I think overall, it was a typical Donald Trump speech aside from those attacks on Vice President Kamala Harris. But I am looking forward to the one on Saturday in Pennsylvania. He'll be in Butler, Pennsylvania, and that's just about an hour away from the Ohio border. And, we're just a couple of days away from the Republican National Convention that's coming up. And we are expected to get that vice presidential announcement fairly soon. It could come at any moment. We're all on standby. We're all waiting for that announcement to come by. So I'll be watching to see who shows up at that rally on Saturday.
Olivia, based on my conversations with those in the Trump world, it seems down to Marco Rubio and J.D. Vance for that slot as the running mate for former President Trump. Do you pick that up as well?
I am. That's similar to what I'm hearing. Senator Rubio there last night in Doral, that's kind of his backyard. He's from Miami. He was just 15 minutes away. So it's kind of an opportunity to prove his strength there in Florida, even though it's no longer a battleground state. It's trending towards, a very firm red state. It was interesting to see him there, see his political prowess, and see how he was able to connect with the crowd and see how that works. The MAGA crowd, as you know, Major, from all the rallies you've been to, they're very loyal to Donald Trump. So picking a new vice president, this is key to them. This matters a lot to them. That's part of the energy we felt there last night. And I also, about Senator J.D. Vance, someone I'm hearing, he's very close with Donald Trump Jr. And that's something that I think is part of the consideration there of the people who have Donald Trump's ear.
Olivia Rinaldi in West Palm Beach, Florida. Thank you so very much. That does it for today. We will be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report with John Dickerson, that starts right now.
Welcome to the Daily Report for July 10th, 2024. I'm John Dickerson. President Biden plays NATO host for a second day as world leaders hear Ukraine's President Zelensky's urgent plea. In his own party, the president